Got a whole lot of history. Classic. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get started, I'd just like to mention that somehow this channel has been nominated in the Cosmopolitan Influencer Awards as Best Newcomer. So if you'd like to vote, I'd really appreciate it. I will leave the link as the pinned comment down below and it'll be in the description box. So if you'd like to go and do that for just like 15 seconds, I'd really appreciate it. Enough of that, on with the video. History has always been one of my favourite subjects. I took it for both GCSE and A-level, very nearly took it for a degree, but decided against it because I didn't love the historiography kind of side of things. In my GCSE, I received full UMS and an A-star, and then in my A-level, I also received an A-star, and I'm not actually sure about UMS, but it was, I mean, I got an A-star. So hopefully I can kind of impart some kind of wisdom, or just at least tell you how I did that. Because history, although it is very complex, and I must say I spent more time on history revision than any other subject, I think at both GCSE and A-level, because the content is so huge. But at the same time, there are lots of different history revision techniques you can use because the subject is so expansive, and there are so many different facets to it. So I thought I'd share those with you today. This is how to revise history, GCSE and A-level, all of my tips. I hope it helps. Just like last time, I'm going to be dividing this video up into sections because you probably will be bored of me by the end of it, so you can just skip to the bits that you need. I'll put all the timings up here. So we're going to be doing general tips, revision, essay writing, and then a little bit about source-based questions. We shall begin with some general tips and tricks, and my first major tip and or trick is to color code your notes. Use highlighters, use pens to identify all of the key widgets of information that you are going to need to learn. So when you're sitting in class and your teacher says this really interesting fact and there are some figures like statistics or a key date or a key figure, put that in a different color. So for example, I would highlight headings, and then so I could really clearly see where all of the different sections in my notes were, and then use a colored pen to write, you know, like Chairman Mao, 1949, 57%, I don't know, that kind of thing. So, for example, here are some notes that I made. This is like a mini essay plan. So the headings are highlighted, and I've also got a kind of like rough introduction and overview. And then I'd put key widgets of information in colour. So like Tibet as a location, the 1950 reunification campaign is in colour. There's a mass uprising in 1959, so 1959 is in colour, and that really helps to just identify which things you're going to need to come back to and want to learn off by heart. Also, while studying, use multiple different resources. So one, your teacher. They have knowledge that will be outside of your textbook and is really useful, so write down everything they say. Secondly, textbook. So you probably have a core class textbook that your class uses, but also there might be other textbooks, so use those too. And it's really about identifying the things that you are going to remember and the things that interest you. So one of the textbooks might be better for the way that you learn, and that might not necessarily be the one that your class uses. But I'd say use them both in tandem, and that really helps. Fourthly, videos. YouTube is so helpful, especially you know, videos about certain events. Like documentaries and stuff that aren't necessarily aimed at A-level students, but they just give you a bit of a different insight, especially if you're a visual learner. But being able to see events unfolding is really useful too, or reconstructions of the events. Just helps you memorize it a bit better, I think. And my final general tip is to always consider the different ways that policies and events affect different people. So you have the different sexes, different classes of people. You have people who live in rural areas versus people who live in the city. You have party workers versus the ordinary man, you know, that kind of thing. So always consider how different events affect different people, and that immediately makes you more analytical. Next up, we have revision, and at this moment in time, if you're watching when I publish this, you're probably thinking, oh my god, I know nothing, revision is going to be impossible because I haven't visioned yet. Do not worry. Revision is actually where everything clicked into place for me, because once you've finished doing the whole course, I feel like that's the only time you can actually fully consider everything and you fully understand. This is actually the time where things start to fall into place, and honestly I think it was about a week before the exam where everything finally clicked for me in my head. So don't panic is my main advice. So I wanted to firstly talk about different revision methods and techniques, starting with timelines, because history is essentially a timeline. I personally found it very useful to make mini timelines about certain things. So for example, a mini timeline about impacts on women in communist China, but also to make a whole timeline about the impacts on everyone in China and all the different policies, when they were, what year they were implemented, when different conflicts started and then erupted and then simmered down, that kind of thing. And it's really useful to make a timeline just to put everything into perspective, be able to visually look at everything and then start analysing from there. On a similar note, time graphs are really useful. So on one axis you'd have maybe power or control, and then on the other axis you'd have a timeline. And then when you put things onto your timeline, you not only put them in chronological order, but you also give them a kind of rating on the graph. So you put it like at the top if they had loads of power, at the bottom if they had little. With the next event you put that, you do the same thing, and then eventually you can step back and look at your graph and you might notice certain patterns, and it really helped me actually to draw an actual line and almost make a graph, and that just gives you a bigger sense of perspective. You're also comparing all the time, and that I think just makes you think in a way that is going to get you an A star. Next, you are going to absolutely hate me for this, but the most important part of history revision, in my opinion, is facts. Key widgets of information, hard facts that can't be disproven. You know, certain policies were introduced at a certain time and no one can dispute that. So one way of learning this that I found really useful was with these. These are flashcards which are on a little ring, and I'd literally just put all of the events and things that I wanted to learn on these flashcards in different colours and sit down and learn them. So this was my history A-level, just the history A-level. I'd also test myself just using normal flashcards like this, and one really good way of using these, because the thing is anyone can make flashcards, but actually knowing how you learn from flashcards I think is the most important thing. So what I would do is I'd make a big set of flashcards, and then if I got them right, I put them into one pile, and if I got them wrong, I put them into another pile. The pile of the things that I got right from the offset went into an every other day pile, whereas the things that I got wrong went into an everyday pile. So I'd go over those things every single day, and if I got them right that day, I'd move them up a pile. So eventually I ended up with sets of flashcards which were revise every day, revise every other day, revise every week maybe, revise every 2 weeks, and revise before the exam. So each time if I got something right, it would move up a pile, and then it would move up a pile, and then it would move up a pile. But as soon as I got one wrong, even if it was in the very top pile, right back to the beginning. And that is how you identify the things that are struggling to click in your head, the things that you need to practice all the time, and keep these with you. You know, if you just put an elastic band around them, you can just pop these in your pocket or in your bag, and then say you're waiting for the bus for 5 minutes, you can get through that whole set in 5 minutes. Easy, maybe even twice, just going over facts and figures, and eventually, I promise, it does click. One thing that will impress an examiner is if you can compare over time. So if there's a figure for, I don't know, how many tons of coal was produced in 1953, then also learn this figure for that for 1962, for 1971, you know, and then you can compare them inherently. You naturally force yourself to compare them because you've got 3 figures, and you'll easily identify a trend there, or, you know, a different leader for each of those time periods, which you can then compare. Also, mind maps are really useful. You can kind of make a mind map about a certain theme, and then I'd use a blue pen and a red pen, and I'd have my negatives in red and my positives in blue. So, you know, like advantages and disadvantages of each of those things and to who. And then I'd step back and I'd be able to see, you know, is it mostly red, is it mostly blue? And compare. So if you're always thinking, okay, I've got this fact, but is that a positive or a negative? You're naturally being analytical. And I think that's kind of what I'm saying with everything, is you need to, even in your revision, force yourself to analyse, because that's what you've got to do in the exam. You've got to evaluate and analyse, not explain. And my final kind of revision tip is to make essay plans. Essay plans are so useful. Your teacher can suggest potential essays that they think might come up. You can kind of guess them as well from the debates and contentious issues within your textbook or things you've discussed in class. Think to yourself, what are 4 points I can make about this in an essay? These are index cards which I made kind of revision essay plans on, and honestly most of the questions that I'd completely made essay plans for came up in the exam, and all I had to do was try and remember the points that I had made. And another thing I actually found really useful was to make kind of like a flow chart of events. So I'd get just a blank piece of paper, completely blank, not worry about the presentation, because I personally like to make my notes quite neat. So I'd get a piece of blank scrap paper, make a mind map, write, you know, a key event in it, 100 Flowers campaign, and then have arrows off of that with a result of that, and then the effects of that, the effects of that, the effects of that, and just brainstorm all of my ideas on the spot, off the cuff, and work it out for myself. And that kind of forces you to link certain events and effects and causes and work out what else you need to learn. Okay, not going to lie, my camera did just temporarily die, but we're back and better than ever. So next up, I wanted to talk about essay writing. Oh Lord. Honestly, my heart rate just sped up just thinking about it. So possibly the best advice that my history teacher at A-level ever gave me was that you can actually plan the first sentence of any essay months before the exam. She always said, as an examiner herself, if you open your introduction with a hard fact, an interesting fact that proves to the examiner that you immediately know what you're talking about, that's the most impressive way to start an essay. So just, you know, you can think of one hard fact for each major event. Also, should have said this before, but always plan your answer before you start writing it. I always, you know, when it gives you like multiple questions that you can choose from, I always do a mini plan for all of them, just really, really quickly. And then I immediately kind of identify, right, which one do I have a good argument for? And then on the top of my page, I make a mini essay plan. And my teacher always said, don't cross that out, just leave it up there. What she always said is that if she turned over a paper and there was a plan at the top, she was immediately thinking, this person knows their stuff, they're organised, they're planned, they know exactly what they're doing, this is going to be a good essay. So the structure that I would always go with is, well, in the essay title, you're always given a kind of stated factor. So introduction, then a paragraph on the stated factor, then your next paragraph should be what you think. So if you don't actually agree that the stated factor is the most important for a key event, then your second paragraph should be what you think. Never put it as your first one, always your second paragraph. And then your subsequent paragraphs, the subsequent maybe 2 paragraphs with different factors, should always link at the end back to the question, so why that factor is more or less important than the stated factor, and then also why your factor that you think is the most important is more important than those two. Does that make sense? I hope so. But always link back to the question, link back to the stated factor, and also link back to your particular argument, like the nuance of your argument. And that just makes it a sustained argument, which is exactly what they're looking for. You know, it's in the mark scheme. Also, you can use language to really clearly bookmark the points where you are about to analyse. So just using words like more importantly or less significantly, you know, things like that, where you quantify, it proves that you're actually thinking analytically and not just, you know, giving a chronological description of events. One thing that my other teacher made us do once, which I found honestly the most useful thing ever, because when I would hand in essays in class, I found it very difficult to be critical of my own work, because when you hand in an essay, you're like, this is as good as it gets for me. This is as good as you're gonna get out of this little brain. But if you look at your essay and you take 2 coloured pens, and with one you underline all of the hard facts, and with the other one you underline all of the analysis, you realise what you're lacking, and you're at the perfect time now where you can improve those things before the exam, so take advantage of it. And as I said before, always think about the different approaches to an answer, so the different perspectives, you know, how did it affect women, how did it affect men, how did it affect children, how did it affect different religious groups maybe, or the government and the normal people, that kind of thing. Always kind of have that in mind. In your conclusion, don't bring up anything brand new, stick to what you've argued. It's not a time to just dump loads of info in, or just, you know, stick to what you've actually said. And finally, and possibly most importantly, every single thing you say needs to be backed up. In an English essay, you're always told that you should back up everything with a quote. Well, in history, back up everything with a fact, with a statistic, with a date, with a person, with a quote, with a place. You know, all of those things back up your argument and make them so much more convincing, and that's what you're trying to do. So finally, I wanted to talk about ketchup, mayo, barbecue. That's right, I wanted to talk about sauces. Was that smooth? I'm not sure. What I would say is read it through once, read through the whole thing, take it in, understand what it's saying, then go through it a second time or even a third time with highlighters, highlight all of the key bits of information. If you're looking for 2 different things within the extract, use 2 different colours. Then when you write your essay and you quote things or you reference things, tick them off. as you go, and then you know exactly what you've used, what you've referenced. You can look back and be like, oh, I missed that, that's really important, now I'll write about it. The provenance is really important too. Obviously everything they give you describing the source that you've been given is there for a reason, it's important. So think about things like the date, where the source comes from. So is it a newspaper, and then is that newspaper a party newspaper, or you know, a workers' newspaper? Who wrote it? Did they have a political agenda of their own? And how reliable are they? That kind of thing. And also, having said that, that's why dates are so important, because you know, if you're given 1949, you'll immediately know what was going on in that at that time, what the political and historical climate was. Always link back to the question, so at the end of every single paragraph, link back to the main question. If it says, which was the most significant factor, say, this was the most significant factor because, and then you are always answering the question. And my camera just died again, which I think is my camera telling me, wrap it up. But I do have to say that history is one hefty subject. Honestly, history A-level could be like 5 A-levels all in one. If you're struggling with the content, don't worry. It is a big subject. It is a struggle, and sometimes it feels really overwhelming. I felt so overwhelmed right up until the exam, but I promise it does all fall into place, and I hope that these methods I spoke about help do that. So I think that is the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was useful. If you did find these tips helpful, then in return, I'd love it if you could give this video a thumbs up. It really helps. And subscribe, because we are getting dangerously close to 25,000. What? And please, 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 if you have 20 seconds after watching this video, please vote for me in the Cosmopolitan Influencer Awards. I would appreciate it more than you will ever know. This is kind of like, you know, when you go on a free walking tour in a city and it's free up until the end, and they're like, ah, I work just on tips, so, you know, this is what I'm doing. I'm like, I've given you all this for free, please help me. Good luck with your GCSE or A-level history. I hope you smash it, I'm sure you will. Don't panic, get your head down, get the work done. It is manageable, I promise. You can do it. So yes, that's the end of the video. I've been Jack Edwards. Hopefully next time you watch, I'll be Zac Efron. Bye-bye.